So I think we're going to get started right. It's 7 o'clock and we want to make sure that we're prompt, respecting everyone's time. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our International Education Week keynote event. My name is Tina Fridgen and I am the principal of Champlain College. I'm also your host for this evening. You may recognize from my background that I have this aggregate rubble concrete with some rocks thrown in there, which is typical of Trent's Ron-Tom architecture. Today, I'm sitting in an office in Champlain College within the Greater Trent University, overlooking the beautiful flags of the Great Hall and seeing the reflection of the crescent moon in the Otonabee River. Here in Champlain College, we respectfully acknowledge that Trent University is situated on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. In a spirit of gratitude and reconciliation, we thank them for their past and continuing care of the lands and waters. We seek to honor their way of life and their teachings. May we honor the teachings of others and the desire to learn. Personally, as a biologist, I've dedicated my life to continued learning about the land on which we live and to all living beings with whom we share it with. Today we gather here on Zoom to learn more about the value of learning. Today we're going to take some time out of our busy lives to learn more about learning on an international scale, but with a focus on how we can apply that learning to help ourselves in times of need, times like now, the time that we're facing in this global pandemic. As principal of Champlain College, I have the fortunate position to dedicate my time to helping to ensure access to higher education and to support our students, not only through our academic advising and academic skills teams, but also through college life. College life makes the connections across disciplines that are relevant across generations. So Champlain College has shared the building with Trent International and the International Development Studies program for as long as I can remember. Not surprisingly, these departments have played a large role in establishing the college's theme in global perspectives. This influence has led our global living learning community, which is a collaboration with the housing team where Champlain College houses a community of students who have applied to live with other students who share the passion about learning about global issues. Champlain College also plays a large role in helping to, along with Trent International, to manage the Trent program called the Trent World University Services Canada Student Refugee Program. It's also known as Trent WUSC SRP for short. This is a program that allows Trent students to give back to the community by sponsoring young refugees to come to Canada, starting with their university education. As you can imagine, this is a very special program and an amazing opportunity, not only for the newcomers, but for our students and staff to learn from them. We are always looking for volunteers for those who can help with this program through either the WUSC, you can contact them through the WUSC email. You can find at trentu.ca/WUSC, or we're also always looking for any donations that can help us run this program. Every student that we can bring to Canada makes a difference. Each year, Champlain College, Trent International and Study Abroad also collaborate on programming for International Education Week. Champlain College's role in this has been to help coordinate this keynote speaker event. This year, we are honored to have Champlain alumni Paul Davidson share with us his experiences as President and CEO of Universities Canada, his perspectives on the value of education globally, how the pandemic is impacting global education, and what Canadian universities are doing to aid in this fight against COVID. Our academic institutions are invaluable, and yet sometimes there's events like these can help remind us why we're fighting so hard for higher education. So I'm going to invite Glenys Burns, AVP International, to introduce Paul to you. But first, I wanted to share some information about how we're going to approach questions and chat for this event. As you may have noticed, the Trent webinar feature is a little different than a Zoom meeting, for those of you who are more familiar with Zoom meetings. The attendees in a webinar are hidden in view from each other. So there's also not a chat feature. We do welcome you to ask questions throughout the talk using the question button at the bottom, and we will be accumulating your questions to answer at the end of the talk. This event is being recorded. Again, our attendees are kept confidential, and a transcript is being recorded that will be shared on our Champlain College YouTube page. So now I would like to introduce our AVP International, Glenys Burns, to introduce International Education Week and our keynote speaker, Paul Davidson. Glenys?
Thank you, Tina. Thanks for that introduction and land acknowledgement. As Tina said, I'm Glenys Burns. I'm the AVP International at Trent University, and I welcome you to this talk and to International Education Week. It's an important week where we recognize international education in a way that's positive for not only domestic students who want to go abroad and get a value of education elsewhere, but for international students who want to come and learn at Trent University. It's a week where we celebrate internationalization engagement efforts and that vital part that international experience has on preparing students for the future in a globalized world. Now, this week is special, and we join 100 countries globally in celebrating international education, international students, and internationalization. Some events happening this week, I'll point out, are our International Exchange Partner Virtual Fair. So you can check that out tomorrow. So that's kind of exciting. You can learn, you can go study all over the world in Australia and Barbados, and Finland, and France, and Ghana, and Italy, and Switzerland, just to name a few. You can check out all of the details on our study abroad website at trentu.ca/study abroad. And since 1984, Trent International has managed an active exchange program, maintaining long-standing study abroad opportunities with more than 58 partners in 36 countries. And we are expanding that. So we're talking with the university, with Limerick University in Ireland, with the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and in France, Université d'Orléans. We currently offer a virtual exchange with the Trent School of the Environment for Circumpolar Studies diploma program. And we're also developing a few more with our other exchange programs. So Champlain College, as Tina mentioned, Champlain College and Trent International welcome you today in conversation with this year's keynote speaker, Paul Davidson. Now, Paul is a grad of of Trent in history and political studies. Paul is also the president and CEO of Universities Canada. Paul has established Universities Canada as the most important national organization for universities in Canada, and doing so has promoted international education. He once told me that he spends about 120 days a year traveling across Canada, but not just Canada, but traveling the world to connect Canadian university education with students in other parts of the world. I understand that COVID has put a stop to his traveling, but we're delighted to have him be able to travel to Trent today via Zoom. Now, if you can see when Paul speaks, Tina mentioned the stone that is in the background for her, the Ron Tom stone. Well, you can see kind of off to the side of Paul's screen, he has some stone there too. So I think there's a little bit happening there of remembrance. Paul's also the past executive director of WUSC, the World University Service of Canada, and he's the Champlain alumni. Paul was one of our very first students at Trent who included a study abroad as part of his Trent degree, going to the University of Zimbabwe. Paul will offer reflections on the impact of the pandemic on international education and research. This talk will put a global perspective on the value of education and the importance of our fight to access to the university education in the face of a pandemic. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I give you Paul Davidson. Paul, I think you're on mute.
There we are. There I can now become a member of Parliament. That's the first thing every member of Parliament says when they speak in the House now, is I believe you're on mute. Glenys, thanks so much for that wonderful introduction and to update us all on the remarkable work of Trent International. And thank you, Tina, for the invitation to be with you tonight. It's really great to be with you. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that tonight I am speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I extend my respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, both past and present, for their valuable contributions to this land. And I invite all of us to pause and reflect on the commitments and obligations made over centuries that have yet to be fulfilled. Today, I think especially of the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that were made just 5 years ago. I'm really sorry that we can't be together tonight, and I look forward to when we can be together again. Glenys mentioned how much I enjoy being on the road and being on campus. It's one of the things I most miss about this pandemic, because when I'm on a university campus, I can feel both decades younger and look decades into the future. And I want to bring warm greetings to everyone tonight, students, faculty, staff, and alumni, and to members of the Peterborough community. I'm really thrilled to have been asked to speak during International Education Week. And I marvel at that because it does feel like just a blink that I was an undergraduate student in the Champlain Senior Common Room with Ray Dart, who's here tonight, listening to guest speakers and trying to muster the courage to raise my hand and ask a question. And Tina was mentioning, you know, the Ron Thom architecture. One of those speakers was Ron Thom, the architect that built beautiful Champlain. Another was Landon Pearson, who just turned 90 and who has had a lifelong commitment to children's rights. And the fact that I can remember those talks 35 years later is evidence of the value of these extracurricular activities that Trent is so good at putting on. Advance warning to all the students in the room, my remarks are going to be briefer than a traditional lecture. So I look forward to time for dialogue and questions. So start thinking your questions and have at me. I mentioned the Senior Common Room a few moments ago, and whenever I think of the Senior Common Room, I think of some great Trent leaders, people like Tom Simons and Jack Matthews, who not only had bold, forward-looking visions, but also set out to build them. I wasn't going to tell this story originally, and I just said I'd be brief, but I'm going to go off script for a moment and just say that I was coming to Trent to visit my twin brother, who was studying at Trent. And I noticed at the bottom of one of the Champlain staircases, a little notice saying Trent International Program. And Jack Matthews had come to the university to say, to build the international program. And the message was, come to Trent, and in your third year, you can study anywhere in the world. And that's what hooked me. That's what brought me to Trent. And the fact that all I had to do was knock on the door and have a word with Jack was such a turning point in my life. So I pay tribute to people like Tom Simons, founding president, and to the late Jack Matthews. And I also want to express appreciation to faculty members such as John Wadland, David Glasgow, and Bob Page, who encouraged us academically and whose extracurricular commitment to Trent also led to formative experiences. I'm thinking of hearing the great Canadian author Margaret Lawrence, or canoeing together at Camp Wanapate, and dinners in faculty members' homes. Of course, one of the areas that I devoted considerable time and energy to when I was at Trent was the WUSC local committee, and I'm so glad that people have mentioned WUSC already tonight. I made lifelong friendships, learned new skills, and got to know the Peterborough community better through my time with WUSC. So a shout out to local committee members and to future local committee members. I'm very proud as an alumnus of Trent's ongoing commitment to inclusive international education, and in particular, its support of refugee students. And just in case you think this will be an entirely nostalgia-based evening, let me say I'm also so impressed at how Trent continues to evolve, to innovate, to collaborate, and to address new and emerging problems in the world. So kudos to Leo Groark and Trent's leadership in advancing higher education, research, and innovation before, during, and after the pandemic. The pandemic. So how's 2020 so far? A colleague recently mentioned Ukraine International Flight 752. That was the downed flight from Tehran. It was shot down in January. It feels like a lifetime ago. The crash had a devastating impact on Canada's academic community. Over 18 universities lost students or faculty. Dozens of lives snuffed out. It also captured how interconnected the world's universities are, that an event so far away could have such lasting consequences here. The casualties included undergraduate students, graduate students doing groundbreaking research, and faculty members who had made a deep commitment to Canada. In a typical year, that would have been the landmark event. And already it is at risk of becoming a footnote because of everything that has happened since. Because as we are recovering from that traumatic event, news of an unnamed novel coronavirus was spreading, and the virus itself was spreading. Here again, universities caught a glimpse of the future as visa processing offices in Asia closed in January. Overseas language testing was suspended in February, and international travel started to seize up. Glenys, you and I haven't spoken about what it must have been like to have had Trent students all over the world in those weeks and months and trying to figure out how to get them home safely and quickly. But it was a very challenging time for Canada's universities. And when the virus hit Canada in March, universities moved at lightning speed. I'm enormously proud of how universities, both faculty and staff and students, have responded in face of the pandemic. Universities moved over 1.4 million learners online in just 10 days, a feat that might otherwise have taken 10 years. And I'll admit that to finish the winter term, in some cases it felt like duct tape and binder twine. But since then, universities have invested in their online capacities, and across the country, they've been able to fulfill their teaching mission through online education. Universities in those first few days and weeks safely depopulated their campuses, repurposing residences for frontline health workers to have safe accommodation, and providing support for international students. Universities marshaled personal protective equipment and chemical reagents. Universities had supplies that were vital to local communities. All of this was simply extraordinary. It required flexibility, adaptability, and resilience on everyone's part. And universities have been recognized as an essential part of Canada's pandemic response. I must say that the federal government recognized the importance of investing in students. They committed over $9 billion in student financial aid, co-ops, and increased internships, and other forms of financial support. That's about 5 times more than any G20 country. And it provided enhanced economic confidence and certainty for students and their families that they would be able to continue their studies. The federal government also invested in new research and in support to keep ongoing research viable. These measures contributed to increased student enrollment in spring and summer in Canada. Retention between year 1 and year 2 has increased, and overall enrollment this fall has also increased. Now, the response to the pandemic has not been without challenges, and weaknesses and disparities have been revealed. Access to broadband and Wi-Fi is very uneven in this country. There were students who had to write final exams online from Tim Hortons parking lots. Others were learning in very difficult environments, without privacy, without quiet, and in some cases in unsafe circumstances. And that's one reason why universities worked hard to keep libraries open. Students and faculty also had to adapt to new forms of evaluation. So both to the students and the faculty here tonight, I see you and I hear you when I acknowledge that everyone has had to adjust and adapt to the realities of this pandemic. The cumulative impact on mental health is real for students, staff, and faculty. And universities are taking this very seriously. One recent development is that in British Columbia, all students now have access to 24/7 online mental health support. And the province of Ontario has increased funding for mental health as well. These issues, access to Wi-Fi, to safe and secure learning areas, adjusting evaluation methods, and responding to mental health all require continued attention and action, and it is underway. I'm proud of how universities responded in Canada, especially in light of developments in other higher education systems around the world. In the United States, over 250,000 university students have COVID. Plans to open this fall in person were seriously upended, and many institutions have been left scrambling. In Australia, there are 40,000 expatriate Australians still trying to return to Australia. You'll remember that the government of Canada made a major effort to repatriate as many Canadians as possible in those first several weeks and months. But there's still 40,000 Australians living outside Australia trying to get back to Australia. And this means that international students are unlikely to be returning ahead of them. And sadly, early on, the Australian government made some very unkind comments about international students during the pandemic. And if we turn our gaze to the United Kingdom, we think of those higher education institutions that are trying to absorb the double shock of COVID and Brexit. And so I want to say that at this time of global crisis, when the world turned inward, Canada's universities reached out to their students, to their communities, and to the world. One of our areas of greatest work at Universities Canada has been on supporting international students who are already here in Canada and ensuring a pathway for more to come to Canada. Because even before the pandemic, Canada's universities have been the Pier 21 of the 21st century. Some of you may have visited Pier 21 in Halifax. It's now an immigration museum, and it served as a gateway to Canada for immigrants for over 70 years. And today, Canada's universities serve as that same sort of magnet for talent. International students are a vital part of Canada's universities, and international student enrollment has increased from about 100,000 students to over 200,000 students in the last 10 years. International experience, international perspectives, cross-cultural competencies are all vital to a 21st century university education. International students also make a very real contribution to Canada's economic health. In fact, it's worth over $22 billion every year to Canada's economy. That's larger than the export of softwood, larger than the export of wheat, and as big as the export of auto parts. Now that's an economic contribution to Canada, not just to universities, not just to the institutions, but to the communities, to the grocery stores, to the car dealerships, to the families that are renting out a room or a basement to international students. And it's taking place not just in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, but it's taking place in places like Peterborough and in communities large and small across the country. And in parts of Canada where the aging demographic is more advanced, international students are key to Canada's immigration goals. Canada's universities are a magnet for talent. So in light of everything that's been going on in 2020, Canada is viewed as offering an outstanding quality higher education experience in communities that are safe and secure and welcoming in a dynamic and progressive setting. In how Canada has responded to the pandemic, our universities are seen even more favorably around the world. As we move forward, and as part of accelerating Canada's social and economic recovery, you will see Canada's universities reach beyond our typical sources of international students, China and India, to emerging countries, economies, and regions like Vietnam, Colombia, and Senegal to deepen educational and research partnerships. And I want to pick up a point that Glenys made a few moments ago, that this is not just about attracting students to Canada, it's also about providing opportunities to Canadian students to study abroad. The federal budget of 2019 committed over $90 million over 5 years to dramatically increase the number of opportunities for students to gain a study abroad experience. And there are a couple of really important features about that commitment. First of all, it's going to put a priority on non-traditional destinations. Canada actually sends very few students overseas, and we need to change that. And to the extent that we do send students overseas, they tend to go to traditional countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Australia. And so this new program will actually put a priority on countries other than those. It's also going to put a priority on students who would not typically participate in international exchanges. I'm thinking here of Indigenous students, students from low socioeconomic status, and disabled Canadians. And so we're very excited about this new outbound student mobility initiative. In fact, we are all set to launch. It was going to launch in the first week of April of 2020. And of course, we had to postpone that. We had to postpone the launch, but plans are underway to reactivate it just as soon as conditions permit. And in the interim, universities are innovating in how they foster international collaboration in virtual classrooms. Another area where the university's instinct has been to reach out is in the area of international research collaboration. And this is an area that has really changed in the intervening decades since I was an undergraduate student at Trent. Canada now has world-leading researchers in universities large and small right across the country. With just 0.5% of the world's population, Canada produces over 4% of the world's scientific papers and about 5% of the world's most frequently cited papers. We're actually more collaborative than others. Canadian publications are co-authored with international colleagues about 45% of the time. And it's just an example of how Canadian academics partner with international partners around the world for the benefit of both researchers and for the world. And the world is noticing. Canada has won 4 Nobel Prizes in the last few years. This year, Michael Houghton at the University of Alberta shares the Nobel Prize in Medicine for groundbreaking work on hepatitis C. And the Nobel Prize will be awarded in just a few weeks' time on December 10th. The problems the world are facing are global problems. Yes, of course, biomedical in an age of the pandemic. And of course, science and engineering in the face of climate impacts. And also profoundly human problems of inequality, systemic racism, and human behavior. As we move out of the pandemic, there is an opportunity for Canada to participate more fully in exciting global research efforts like Horizon Europe as full partners. I started this evening by referring to my time with the WUSC Local Committee when I was a student here. I'm delighted to know that students and staff and faculty at Trent continue to support the Student Refugee Program. The Student Refugee Program has existed since 1978, and there are now local committees on over 100 campuses across the country, and it has expanded to include community colleges. The Student Refugee Program was unique in the world, student-led private sponsorship of the most vulnerable, recognizing the transformative power of education and the ability of individuals to make a difference. I'm really excited that since I left WUSC and as the program has developed, it's now being seen as a model around the world to emulate, especially as the world refugee crisis deepens. I was always impressed by WUSC because it is motivated by high ideals and driven by practical action. The pandemic has disrupted the program, but not the commitment. And I'm glad to know that Trent is actively preparing to sponsor students again as soon as it is safe to do so. Now, I left WUSC over 12 years ago, but I'm still in contact with colleagues there. And WUSC continues to partner with organizations in some of the world's most challenging refugee camps. They too are adapting their programming with homeschool backpacks, radio outreach, and phone-based counseling. They're particularly supporting girls to provide alternatives to early marriage, child labor, and transactional sex. Isolation demands on refugee camps have meant markets have closed. International remittances from family members abroad have slowed, and school feeding programs are no longer operating. These realities underscore the global nature of the pandemic, and that access to quality post-secondary education remains a challenge for hundreds of millions of people around the world. These realities also underscore how students in Canada are continuing to reach out, just as they have done for decades. I hope to have given you a bit of a picture of how Canada's universities have responded to the challenges of the pandemic and provided some glimpses of the future. In a world of closing borders and closing minds, Canada's universities are reaching out to students, to researchers around the world, to build bridges, to build connective tissue. In a world beset by growing inequality, universities are working to solve problems in Canada and beyond. You can see it right in Peterborough. In a world ravaged by climate change, universities are conducting the research and finding solutions and building the networks so that we can address this existential challenge. Not by cloistering in ivory towers, not by doubling down and only taking care of our own, but by being active and engaged in the community, the country, and the world. When the world turns inward, we reach out. Canada and Canada's universities have an opportunity to lead in rebuilding and repairing the world we face. Coming out of the pandemic, Canada's universities will help accelerate the social and economic recovery. And I know that in this virtual meeting tonight are people with the talent, the tenacity, and the commitment to keep reaching out, to keep pushing forward, and to build on the work of those who went before us. Let me close with one more anecdote from my time at Trent. The early 1980s were not kind to Peterborough. Major employers were shuttering their factories. GE, Outboard Marine Corp, employers that paid good wages. Unemployment was at record highs. And I know from experience how cold and dark and wet it can be in November in Peterborough. We were out trying to raise money to support refugee students. And despite the economic circumstances and despite the climate, Peterborough responded. In particular, I'm thinking of June Smith, who ran a soup and sandwich shop on Hunter Street called the Farmer's Kitchen. She heard what we were up to, and she offered us meeting space. When she heard the former refugees needed clothes, she found some winter coats and winter boots for us. She often offered a free meal to students in need and a listening ear. When we had an occasion to celebrate, she would stay open late and let us bring musical instruments, and she would join in the party. I say this because when we speak of millions or billions or the overwhelming need globally, we can often lose sight of the very real impact of person-to-person contact, of how introducing refugee students to Trent has enriched the campus and the community, of how international students make lasting contributions to Canada, and how by deepening our commitment to international education, we offer hope to students in Canada and around the world. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be with you tonight. I look forward to the dialogue.
Thanks so much, Paul, for that. That was really inspiring in this time. Okay, so we've had quite a few questions sent our way. So I'm just going to be going through those questions. I hope that we'll have enough time to review. So I'm going to just do them in order from how they were sent to us, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay, so this one is from Beth Needham. Can you outline a few areas of interest for research that might be a benefit, of benefit to international students and their host universities post-pandemic?
Oh, I'd love to talk a lot about this because the range of research problems that the world is seeing right now has never been greater. And we often think about what were some of those challenges before the pandemic that we knew existed. Climate change, absolutely, tremendously important, tremendously urgent. Growing inequality within communities like Peterborough, inequality between communities like Peterborough and its surrounding communities, inequalities between Canada and the rest of the world. How do we bridge those inequalities and raise everyone up? Thinking about systemic challenges like systemic racism, these were all existing before the pandemic and they're incredibly urgent. If we think about biomedical issues of research, you know, the fight to find a cure for hepatitis C and a treatment for hepatitis C is real. And of course, and cancer and all the other biomedical challenges that are out there. And frankly, it's through international research collaboration that so much of this work is being done. Not only at the cutting edge of high-end science technology, but also taking into account indigenous ways of knowing, indigenous understandings of the world. And so that's a very rich list of possible research opportunities before the pandemic. And I think what the pandemic has done is it's revealed those challenges and the sharpness of those challenges. It's also revealed a whole host of new challenges. I'm very excited, I'm very encouraged about the race towards a vaccine. There have been two candidate vaccines that seem to be making real progress. And the world is right to be hopeful. The world is right to be enthusiastic. The stock market is rebounding. But boy, there are very real challenges about how are we going to distribute that vaccine? Who's going to get it first? Who's not going to get it first? One of the candidate vaccines requires to be kept at negative 70 degrees Celsius. Just imagine how challenging that will be. And how do we maintain the political will to recognize that until everyone is protected from the virus, none of us are protected from the virus? So that involves a whole range of logistical and technical research questions, but also some very fundamental questions about who has access to the resources of the world. And I know those are the kinds of issues that Trent has done such great work at in the past in thinking through those challenges and identifying solutions forward. So they're just a few ideas, and I could go on, but there may be other questions.
Thanks so much. Okay, so this is from, I actually really liked your response. One of them in particular, I have great concerns. I'm a biologist and environmental scientist, and I have great concerns about how much this pandemic has stalled the conversation about climate change. And in fact, when you look at all the disposable materials that we have been using during this last 8 months, it's just, it is so disturbing for me. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of places where we can do research, to use research to help prepare, because I don't think that this is going to be our only pandemic, I'm afraid. Maybe
if I can, before we jump into another question, I'll just comment on that, Tina, because it's been one of the challenges that universities are dealing with. Like, first of all, everyone's desperate to get into the post-pandemic world. Universities are, the government is, but the pandemic is still very much with us and among us. And here where I am, just outside of Ottawa, we're very much in a second wave here, and we hope that measures will take to contain it. But one of the ongoing challenges will be, how do we pay attention to those issues before the pandemic? How do we make sure that not everything is displaced by the pandemic? And just to give some examples of work that we've been working on at Universities Canada, in some places for over a decade, how does the Indigenous reconciliation agenda continue? How does the drive towards addressing climate impact and climate change continue? How do we address issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion in Canada and in Canada's universities? And how do we advance issues of mental health care? Those are all parts of our agenda right up until March 13th. And then when the pandemic hit, all of our attention moved shortly. But I want to provide some assurance to people here tonight that we're continuing to advance that agenda, and we're continuing to fight for resources from the federal government and other sources to make sure that the academic community can continue to play its role in accelerating social and economic recovery.
Thanks so much. Actually, I'm going to jump to another question from Jonathan that was asking a little bit related to accessibility and the accessibility of international travel. And it's unfortunate, there's so many great questions here. I wish I could bring Kate Logan online too, because I know that there's a lot of questions about study abroad. So I just wanted to share that for people who do have questions about study abroad in particular and are looking for more information, please feel free to email Kate Logan at studyabroad@trentu.ca. But one of the questions were, what are universities doing for domestic people with a difference who have autism who want to travel internationally and contribute to the economy?
Thanks very much for that question. And again, it's one of the things I'm most excited about this new program for outbound student mobility. Frankly, I've been working on this issue since about 1985 when I was an international student. But I think everybody should have the opportunity to spend some part of their higher education career outside of Canada just to get a different perspective. And one of the things we've been working on over the last 5 years or so has been to make sure that that's a real opportunity for people that wouldn't otherwise get the chance to travel. And that includes all sorts of different groups of people, kinds of people in different circumstances. And one would be those with special needs like autism or other challenges. And so one of the upsides, I hate to say it that way, but one of the upsides of the pause that we had to put on outbound student mobility because of the pandemic is it's giving universities a chance to reflect on how they can support the needs of students with a range of special needs, with a range of different needs, to encourage them and enable them to study abroad. And so that work is being done. Glenys may have more ideas and information specifically about what's happening at Trent, but I do know it's interesting to see how universities position themselves, right? There has been in Canada for years a race to be the most excellent or the most global or the most fill in the blank. There's a university in Western Canada that proudly plants its flag by saying, we're the most inclusive university in the country. And 1,500 of their students are students that would have in other areas been told they had intellectual disabilities and would not have had an opportunity at post-secondary education. And that for me gives me hope. It also speaks to the value of the kind of meetings like this, and also the meetings that we have at Universities Canada, where those best practices get shared across the country. So if you have particular observations or particular recommendations about what it is that you might need to make that a foreseeable dream, I encourage you to speak to Glenys or to speak to Tina. And if you wanted to loop me into that conversation by email, I'd be happy to keep that conversation going.
Feel free to jump in, Glenys, if you wanted to comment on that.
Sure, just briefly, because I know there's lots of other great questions for Paul to answer. Of course, we are an inclusive office and institution, and we want students to have the opportunity to go abroad no matter. I just know that recently we've accepted students with disabilities, and it's been a range of disabilities. And we are also able, if you contact Kate or I or the international office, we're happy to work with anybody who wants to go to study abroad. We encourage it. We're fundraising for it constantly, and we want students to have that global experience. And we would work with our partners, right? There's lots of our partners who are all over the world who are understanding, and it's reciprocal on the exchange agreement. So yes, absolutely, I could say that we can work with you and find the best fit for you and the best country for you to go to.
Thanks so much, Glenys. So another question has come up. Paul, you say that you actually studied abroad in your undergraduate degree. Can you share with me, try to put into words how your study abroad experience impacted you and shaped your career?
Wow, it's a great opportunity to reflect on that. And I think about it quite a lot, actually, in the work that I'm doing. I had a burning desire when I was at Trent to learn more about Africa. It was at a time when the Republic of South Africa was an apartheid regime. And just next door, the country of Zimbabwe was just 5 years old as an independent country. It had just come out of a period of revolutionary struggle and of a struggle for independence. And that fascinated me. And so the opportunity as, let's see, I would have been 22 years old to compress my studies at Trent so I could finish in time to start the next academic year without a break, arrive in Harare on my own, making my way to the campus by cab, arriving in the middle of a long weekend when there was no reception committee, finding my way. They actually thought I was visiting faculty members, so I got some very nice accommodation for the first few days. And then ultimately joining a university residence where I was the only white person amongst 500 students, all who had fought for their independence, who had written their grade 8 exams traveling through war zones. It's an experience I'll never forget. And this would have been about 1985. And I will say I'm still in touch with one of those students, and we remained close friends over all those years. Sadly, many of them passed away from AIDS because the AIDS pandemic swept through Zimbabwe just after the time I was there. And so it does give you pause to reflect on our circumstances here in Canada, the choices that we get to make, the opportunities we get to have, and how we take the skills and the learning that we acquire at Trent and that we develop at Trent in community and apply those to the world. And I will say I never had a career plan or a career ambition. I'm not one of those people that has a 5-year plan, but it was always about how can I take the things that I've learned, the experiences I've had, and apply them in a way to make a difference. I would just say that the final thing, and it becomes more and more true every day, and you look around the world, the phrase cross-cultural competencies kind of rolls off your tongue, but those are real skills. To be able to live and work in a place that is working in a different language, a different culture, a different history, that's got value. It's got value in its own sense. It's also got value in terms of how you present yourself to where you might want to be employed or a business you might want to create. So there's just off the top. Imagine if you gave me more time to think about it, I could do a thesis.
That's fantastic. So Paul, there are two different questions I have here, and some of them are longer than the others. I think that I'm going to summarize two of them and talk about them together. So what are some reasons why students would choose to study abroad? How does finances usually play into that? And then another question would be, why do you think there's a low interest in Canadian students to study abroad in proportion to the number of our students? Yeah. So it's almost like, why do students choose it? What are the main reasons? And then also what's keeping them from doing it?
I'll start with the what's keeping them and then turn it back into the why. And we've looked at this quite carefully. And for years and years and years, we said, well, it's money. That's the biggest obstacle. And it's true that for many students, it does seem insurmountably expensive to study abroad. But universities are adapting to that need. And so, the idea of genuine exchanges where tuition is paid locally and really what you need is the airfare and living expenses reduces the cost. And so people are working on the cost aspect. The other obstacle, and this is on us, and I turn to Teen and I turn to Glenys on this, it's about credit recognition and mutual recognition of those credits, because nobody wants to spend a year studying hard and maybe paying a little more than they would otherwise, and then find that the credits aren't fully recognized. And that's something that, again, universities have done a really good job in the interval to address. The other thing that we see as an obstacle is that people tend to go to the familiar countries, and that's a big challenge. That those that do go abroad will choose the US, the UK, Australia. Now, for English-speaking universities, those are all English-speaking countries, and so the challenge is a little easier to study there. And France is the next most common country to study in, and those are largely Francophones from across Canada studying in France. So we wanted to look at how we could get out of those areas and into areas where frankly, the world is changing faster and where the economies are growing more quickly and where the things we need to learn about as a country. And that's why we're putting an emphasis on those. Now, why do people choose to go abroad? I think there's still, let's face it, there's an opportunity for adventure when you're in your undergraduate years that may be harder to fulfill later in life. And so there is a sense of adventure, a sense of curiosity, a chance to learn a new language. Those are all practical reasons for people to study abroad. And I'm just so impressed when Glenys says that there are 58 partners in 36 countries for Trent students to choose from. It's such a great invitation to go and consider and think and explore what opportunities might be there for you.
I think too, the focus, it would be nice to have such a focus if you're trying to travel internationally for a first time, it might be nice to have a focus of actually going to an institution and studying particular courses. I know that my first international experiences were well after my degree was over, and it was quite intimidating to just jump into Thailand without any previous travel experience.
I'll jump in there as well again if I can one more time and just say that that's absolutely it. I mean, we talk about cross-cultural competencies. We talk about international fluency, like that it's not unusual to get on a plane, travel the world, land, work 72 hours straight, do what you need to do. Those are real life skills that people need. But also, I mean, the great advantage of these kind of opportunities is that you have a line of sight into the country you're studying in that you just don't get as a tourist. And you know, again, to reflect on my own experience all those years ago, the way the terms were, you'd study for 10 weeks, then you get 4 weeks holidays. And so on each vacation, I got a chance to travel the country with students from that part of the country. You just don't get that anywhere else. Glennis, I think you wanted to jump in.
Oh, I just wanted to say, Paul, those are great answers. So I was just thinking, you know, Canada is a big country and we do a great job. So students don't really think maybe they want to go, but they should be going. But we at Trent International and Keep Study Abroad program, like, we make it easy. It's not hard. Like, they think it's hard to go as well, but it's not that hard. Pick your country. You know, we want students to go abroad. So if you're going to a more safer country, that's great. Go and do that. We've got some other countries where maybe you need to expand and think, wow, that would be really cool to go there. Another point would be that we are embedding, at Trent, we embed the programs, the study abroad into the program. So Ghana would be an example of that. So there's no question about getting the credit for it. There's no question about, there's going to be support for you to go. So students shouldn't be afraid that they won't get the credit. They will get the credit. Kate will ensure that before they go, all that's taken care of. So students just have to take that first step, and after that, we'll certainly be there to help them. So don't be afraid, and it's easy to do.
I think that's another feature of this, and Trent has really done a great job on this, is developing those kind of cohort experiences. So it's not like you're going out on your own completely alone. There will be people that know where you're going. There'll be people going with you. There'll be, in some cases, faculty alongside, and those different kind of models. It was really interesting in chatting with folks and securing. It was like a $95 million investment the federal government has put into this over the next 5 years. It was like, this isn't the way it was 30 years ago. These are new ways of doing international education, and for students that have that chance right now or in the next short while, boy, I'd grab it.
Okay, let's just switch up the topic for a little bit.
Sure.
I have a question, but thank you so much, Glennis and Paul, for that. I was really grateful when Glennis jumped in and said, you will get your credits, because I used to be an academic advisor, and I can't even tell you how much work Kate Logan does in the background to ensure that we are finding those equal credits. Okay, so Mohammed Farah would like to ask a question. So he says, thanks, Paul, for your time. As a WUSC-sponsored student, I constantly think about how WUSC-sponsored students can give back. Can you suggest any non-government or government agencies that they can approach or that can provide resources? I have WUSC in mind already, but also thinking more about, as I graduate soon, how can I give back? Thank you.
It's really exciting to know that you're a sponsored student at Trent, and nice to see that continuity over the years. And I don't know whether there's ever been an effort to regather all the former students from Trent, but it'd be a considerable number, and they would be in all walks of life in Canada now, which is really exciting. And I'm grateful for the spirit of how do I in turn give back. And you may know of many ways from your own experience and from your own background. But I think one of the great skills that former sponsored students have is helping new Canadians understand how to navigate Canada. Because you've had a supportive environment with a WUSC local committee, you've had some time at the campus, just understanding how things work in Canada. You're a great ambassador for that. And so I think of the settlement agencies in Canada that are desperately in need of volunteer help. I think of settlement agencies who are in need of policy help. They're in need of knowing your experiences. And that would be one avenue I would look at. And also thinking about continuing to be a mentor or big brother, big sister to to others who are finding their way on a university campus for the first time.
So on that same note, can you share how internationalizing your degree can enhance your employment opportunities or the skills that you have to give to other agencies?
Yes, and I'm sure Glennis and others around Trent International can help students take their experience and translate it and articulate it in a way that makes sense for employers. So let's again, I'll be a test case. I went to Zimbabwe for a year abroad. I came back. I did a master's degree in the missionary history of Southern Africa from 1890 to 1923. Now, the world was beating down my door to hire me because I knew everything there was to know about missionary history of Southern Africa from 1890 to 1923. It's not necessarily the actual work you do or the actual courses you study. It's your problem-solving abilities. It's your ability to work in different cultures. It's your ability to articulate and express what you have learned, what you have studied, and make it understandable to others that really has lasting impact. And so, I mean, it's almost standard advice. Study what you love. Do what you want to do now because you've got a chance to do it. And then work with folks like Glennis and Tina and others. Say, how do I articulate that into a job interview? You know, so what did I learn in my year abroad? Well, I learned about how to navigate the banking system between Canada and Zimbabwe. I learned about how to navigate the transportation system. I learned about landing on my own, not knowing a soul, and walking into a room and explaining who I was and where I came from. All of those skills are things that are transferable, whether it's in sales, marketing, politics, you know, on and on it goes. And so, you know, you won't come back from your year abroad and immediately be made Secretary General of the United Nations, but you will have valuable skills that you can use, whether it's in Peterborough, whether it's in Ottawa, whether it's in your hometown. Those skills will be of lasting value. I would just say again, and I say it kind of sheepishly because my ability in other languages is still somewhat limited. To the extent that you can learn additional languages, that puts you on a fast track to any job interview.
I always think of the terms of resiliency, entrepreneurship, determination. All of these are such important skills that any employer is looking for. Okay, so to change the topic yet again, we only have 3 more minutes. So I'm just going to cover one last question, if that's okay, Paul?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So this one's actually from Ray Dart. Thanks so much, Paul. With COVID and all, there's a lot of attention to the big picture, but I'm wondering about the smaller and more specific right now. Do you have some examples of what you think of as exciting internationalization initiatives that other Canadian unis are doing? Can you think of anything on the spot that seems particularly exciting or promising to you?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I'll give at least 2 examples, and if I can think of a third one, Ray, I'll share the third as well. And for those, just to be fully candid, Ray and I were contemporaries at Trent all those years ago. He still has the photos, so if you want to embarrass me, speak to Ray. The couple of things. One is about there's been so much lost because of the pandemic, and let's be candid about that. You know, people are frustrated because it's persistent. People are fatigued because everything is just a little bit harder than it would be, and people are fragile. Like, emotions are closer to the surface. Slights that might have gone unnoticed get articulated or expressed in ways that might not be desirable. And so let's acknowledge that people are carrying a lot as they navigate the pandemic. At the same time, and this is what I hope came through in some of my remarks tonight, that it has been a time of incredible resilience, incredible adaptability. Like, you don't normally think of universities as being places of fast action. I mean, I know they are, and we know they are, but the universities have been incredibly dynamic and innovative over the last several weeks and months. And as weeks turn to months, and as months turn to terms, and as terms turn to academic years, people are still having to reflect on, what are we learning? what's different, what do we want to keep from what we've learned, and what do we want to drop. But just a couple of examples. Earlier in the spring, universities were really worried that enrollment was going to plunge. And, you know, the way that the first several weeks were going, it was really scary. So the folks at Memorial University, the registrar at Memorial, got a list of every student that was between 5 and 10 credits short of graduating. And they phoned each one and said, we're now offering courses fully online. You can do this. You know, the oil industry in Newfoundland has tanked. But while you're sitting at home, why don't you finish off your degree? And so Memorial actually has the highest enrollment it has ever had. Part-time enrollment is up 14.5% across the country. So there are opportunities amidst all this. Now, turning to the international dimension, I mean, there are limits to Zoom calls. I mean, I'm loving seeing your individual photos tonight, or not seeing your individual photos tonight because we're in the webinar mode. There are limits to it, but it does mean that for faculty members that have research partnerships already around the world, it's much easier to put 3 or 4 students together from each side and tackle a problem or tackle a seminar. And I know that's going on. You know, the first question tonight was, what about research topics that we could pursue internationally? Well, I know that that's happening, both in terms of pursuing research, but also in terms of advancing the teaching curriculum, so that at universities I've seen across the country, where you're now getting in real time 3 and 4 countries worth of students having a classroom discussion, not unlike the ones we used to have in the Champlain seminar rooms, but now with students from around the world. So there are opportunities to be found here, and Ray, I'll think of a third example. We can follow it up another time.
Thanks so much. Okay, well, I promised I wouldn't go over, but terrible of me to do so. But there's one last person I'd like to invite. So I'd like to invite our Champlain Cabinet President, Carter Tongs, to give our thanks to you, Paul.
Awesome. Hi, can everyone hear me? Everything? We're all good? Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Carter. I am a 4th year joint biology and sociology major here at Trent, and I am this year's Champlain College Cabinet President. So on behalf of the college, Paul, I just wanted to thank you for coming in to speak to us today, or signing on, I guess, to speak to us today, and providing us some perspective around the pandemic. I feel like in the last year, a lot of our focus has been on issues that we have around online school and the pandemic, as opposed to some positive things that have come out of it. So it was really awesome to hear about all the support that Canada and Canada's. I did get to see firsthand the support the university provided, like Trent specifically, but other universities provided those students. And hearing about the collaboration and global perspectives that Canada is known for has made me really grateful to live here, and privileged enough to be a part of this reputation as a Canadian academic. I can only say that my own university pandemic experiments has continued to encourage me to seek out global perspectives. So on behalf of the college, Tina and I would like to offer you a couple of gifts, which I'm just going to screen share. Awesome. So we have a little Champlain College print that we have framed. WUSC donated 2 beeswax candles for you, and Trent Apiary donated some honey as well. So Tina is in charge of sending that to you. So yes, thank you so much for coming to speak to us today.
Terrific. Thanks, Carter. It's been a great pleasure. And again, particularly the students that are with us tonight, keep it up, keep at it. You're doing great work. And Tina, if I can, I think you used a line about how college life crosses disciplines and across a lifetime. I hope you got a sense of that tonight, that the friendships that we made, that Ray and I made while we were at Champlain, and that we've made with others, do really last a lifetime. And it's not just what you do in class, it's all the other things you do. Champlain Cabinet and the Champlain community. Thanks, Carter.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Glennis, for joining us. Thanks, Carter. Cheers. And of course, thanks to everyone who joined us.